There are times in our lives when we find ourselves at a crossroads, that place of struggle, that place on the journey where the path ahead is yet to be determined, a time when decision is required. Not to decide is not an option because it leaves us standing, just simply standing at the crossroads. Every choice impacts what will come. Our future hangs in the balance at the crossroads where we have to struggle, sometimes with ourselves, sometimes with one another, sometimes with God, where we struggle with the past in order to move into the future. Jacob was at a crossroads, the ford of the Jabbok River. Actually, Jacob's direction had already been determined. He knew where he was headed. He already had taken his entire family, his extensive, large family, to the other side. All that Jacob owned also was on the other side. His flocks and cattle, tents, bedding, clothing, cooking utensils and food, tools and fuel, artwork, games, and the pets and toys of the children. All of his workers, the whole community that surrounded him, were on the other side. Some had gone on before to meet Esau. The rest made the journey with Jacob in the middle of the night. Everyone, everything crossing over, moving beyond the crossroads, starting down the path toward the next place of life, that place to where God was calling them. Jacob took everyone and everything, crossing over with them, setting them on the path for the next steps on the journey. But then Jacob went back. He went back to the old camp, the old place where they had been, back in order to come to terms with all that had come before, back in order to come to terms with all that was yet to come. Jacob went back and was completely alone in this special place of transforming encounter that would prepare him, encounter that would change him for what life was about to bring. But we're starting to get a little bit ahead of ourselves here. We need to recall the backstory. Perhaps you remember it. Jacob, the second-born twin of older brother Esau. Jacob, who swindled his brother out of his deserved birthright. Jacob, who also tricked his brother out of their father's final blessing. The blessing that in fact gave Jacob prominence over his brother. The blessing that was always intended for the oldest son, for Esau, with no option for change after it was given. Once the blessing was given, the course was set. And this blessing was also the promise of God to make this one receiving the blessing into a great nation, a great people who would inhabit this land that God had promised. In this moment of blessing, Jacob's course is set. His future is clearly laid out. And yet we find Jacob fleeing to a faraway land, fleeing from the land that is promised to him, fleeing from Esau's murderous, though certainly understandable, rage, going into exile away from the land that had been promised to him. During the flight, you might remember, he goes to sleep in the wilderness using a rock for a pillow, and though unaware, finds himself in another sacred place, a special place, where there will be the first transforming encounter. As he lies sleeping, he dreams of angels ascending and descending from a ladder that stretches to heaven, and then Yahweh stands right beside him, promising him prosperity, promising to bring him back to his homeland, promising to make him and his descendants into a great nation, a blessing of all people, promising to be with Jacob, to keep him, to accompany him, and to bring him home, a confirmation of the future before him. You might remember the next part of the story. Years pass with complex and complicated family dynamics and conflicts. Eventually, Jacob, who by now has a large and extensive family, who has amassed great wealth and many possessions, begins the journey home to fulfill the blessings and promises that had been made to him long ago, confirmed along the way. It's time to go home. Time to face Esau, who by now also has a large, extensive family, who also has amassed great wealth and prosperity, who actually is currently living in the land that Jacob plans to inhabit. Esau, who when Jacob last knew was in a murderous rage, plotting to kill him as soon as their father had died, and their father has died. Jacob gathers all of his family, all of his workers, all of his cattle, flock, and herds, all of his possession, all of his wealth, and the journey begins. Time to move yet again, time to go home.